clink of forks against ceramic, usually a comforting sound, felt like tiny hammers chipping away at my last nerve. It was Sunday dinner again, a ritual I'd come to dread more than root canal surgery, and the air in my parents' cramped dining room was thick with the usual blend of stale pot roast, unaddressed resentments, and the cloying scent of my mother's cheap perfume. I sat there, Sarah, 32 years old, meticulously cutting a piece of roast beef, while the cacophony of my family swirled around me. My mother, Brenda, was holding court, recounting a minor inconvenience at the grocery store as if it were a Greek tragedy, her voice rising and falling dramatically. Across from me, my brother, Kevin, 28, slumped in his chair, scrolling through his phone, occasionally grunting in response to Brenda, his plate barely touched. My sister, Lisa, 35, picked at her salad, her eyes darting between Brenda and Kevin, a sarcastic comment perpetually hovering on her lips. My father, David, sat at the head of the table, silent, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the window, his usual escape. For years, I had been the family's silent architect, the invisible glue, the one who picked up the pieces no one else bothered to acknowledge. When Kevin lost his job, again, it was Sarah who quietly covered his rent for 3 months. When Brenda's credit card was maxed out, again, it was Sarah who found a way to pay the minimums just to keep the wolves from the door. When Lisa's car broke down, it was Sarah who researched mechanics, negotiated prices, and even drove her to work for a week. I was the responsible one, the quiet achiever, the one who always had a plan, a solution, a spare $100. They didn't ask. They just expected. And I, in my misguided loyalty and desperate hope for approval, always delivered. Today, however, felt different. The air was charged with a peculiar tension, even for us. Kevin had been particularly sullen all week, and I knew why. His car insurance was due, and he hadn't paid it in months. I had been sending him reminders, gentle nudges, then increasingly firm warnings. He'd ignored them all. "Sarah, darling," Brenda chirped, pulling me from my thoughts, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that always preceded a demand. Kevin was just telling me about his little situation with his car. You know, the one you helped him with last time. My stomach clenched. "What about it, Mom?" I asked, my voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside. Kevin finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, so, my insurance. It's expired. Got pulled over this morning. Cop was a real jerk about it." He shrugged, as if this were an inconvenience inflicted upon him by the universe, not a direct consequence of his own inaction. "Anyway, I need you to just take care of it. Get it reinstated. I'll pay you back, eventually." The eventually was a well-worn joke between us, a punchline to a tragedy. I put my fork down carefully, deliberately. "Kevin, we talked about this. I told you I wouldn't be covering your insurance anymore. You have a job now, part-time, but it's something. You need to manage your own finances." Brenda gasped, a hand flying to her chest. "Sarah, how can you say that? He's your brother. He needs your help. What if something happens? What if he gets into an accident and can't afford the damages? Think of the family." Her voice escalated, morphing into a familiar whine. "You're so good with money, darling. It's just a small thing for you, isn't it? You always have extra." Lisa snorted, a dry, cynical sound. "Yeah, Sarah, don't be such a Scrooge. It's just Kevin being Kevin. You always bail him out." Her tone was laced with a peculiar blend of mockery and expectation, as if she were simultaneously judging me for being a doormat and expecting me to continue being one. My father, David, finally stirred, clearing his throat. "Now, Brenda, kids, let's not argue at the dinner table." His voice was weak, a futile attempt at peacekeeping that only served to highlight his perpetual inaction. The words, the entitlement, the blatant disregard for my own financial stability and emotional well-being hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the insurance, it was the entire tapestry of their demands, woven over decades. It was the constant drain, the emotional blackmail, the way they treated my resources, time, money, energy, as if they were limitless and freely available for their consumption. I had always been the fixer, the one who absorbed their chaos, the quiet anchor in their storm. But anchors, even the strongest ones, can break. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet, terrifying finality. It was like a delicate glass rod, bent and stressed for too long, finally fracturing. I looked at Brenda, her face contorted in a mask of aggrieved martyrdom. I looked at Kevin, his eyes already back on his phone, oblivious. I looked at Lisa, her smirk still in place, a silent challenge. And I looked at David, resigned, absent. A profound calm settled over me, chilling and absolute. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a cold, clear realization. I was done. Done being the fixer, done being the bank, done being the emotional punching bag. This wasn't about revenge in the fiery, dramatic sense. This was about reclamation, reclaiming my life, my peace, my very self. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the din. Everyone stopped. Kevin looked up, startled. Brenda's mouth hung slightly open. Lisa's smirk vanished. "No, I won't. Kevin, you need to handle your own insurance. I'm not paying for it. Not now, not ever again." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. It was the first time I had ever said a definitive no to such a direct demand. Brenda's face crumpled. Kevin's jaw tightened. Lisa's eyes narrowed. The battle had begun, though they didn't know it yet. For me, it was already over. The decision was made. The next morning, the quiet revolution began. I started small, almost imperceptibly. The family Netflix account, which I had paid for since streaming became a thing, was the first casualty. I changed the password and didn't share the new one. Then came the shared Spotify family plan. Gone. My personal Amazon Prime account, which they used for everything from last-minute birthday gifts to bulk toilet paper, was secured with two-factor authentication. The initial reactions were confused texts. "Hey, Sarah, Netflix isn't working. Did you change the password?" From Kevin. My music stopped playing. "What's up?" From Lisa. I responded with polite, brief messages. "Oh, I've decided to make my personal accounts private. You'll need to set up your own." No explanation, no apology, no room for negotiation. Then came the bigger cuts. Kevin's car insurance was still expired. He called, then texted, then called again, his messages growing increasingly frantic. "Sarah, seriously, I can't drive. I'll lose my job. Just do it, please." I let his calls go to voicemail. I read his texts and didn't reply. He showed up at my apartment building, buzzing my intercom relentlessly. I didn't answer. Brenda's calls were harder to ignore. Her voice, when I finally picked up after a dozen missed calls, was laced with a familiar blend of concern and thinly veiled accusation. "Sarah, darling, what's going on with Kevin? He's so upset. He says you're not helping him. Is everything all right? You know how sensitive he is. You're making him feel so abandoned." "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "Kevin is an adult. He needs to take responsibility for his own life. I'm not abandoning him. I'm allowing him to grow up." "But you always help him," she wailed, her voice rising. "That's what family does. You're being so cruel. What happened to my sweet, helpful Sarah?" "She's still here, Mom," I replied, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "She's just learning to help herself first." I ended the call before she could launch into another guilt trip. The financial disentanglement was the most liberating. I canceled the automatic transfers I'd set up years ago to cover Brenda's miscellaneous expenses, which were always just more shopping. I stopped paying the outstanding balance on Lisa's old student loan, a debt she'd conveniently forgotten about. The relief of seeing my own bank account flourish, unburdened by their constant drain, was intoxicating. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the control, the power I was taking back. The emotional boundaries were trickier, more painful. I started screening my calls, only answering when I felt emotionally prepared. I declined invitations to family dinners, citing vague work commitments or prior engagements. When I did attend, I arrived late and left early. I perfected the art of the non-committal answer, the polite deflection. "That sounds like something you'll need to handle, Kevin." "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom." "I'm not really equipped to help with that, Lisa." They didn't understand. They couldn't. Their world revolved around their needs, their dramas, their expectations of my endless availability. My quiet withdrawal was interpreted not as self-preservation, but as betrayal. The escalation was swift and predictable. Brenda began calling extended family members, weaving tales of my sudden, inexplicable cruelty. "Sarah has changed," she'd lament, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "She's so cold now, I don't know what happened. She just abandoned her family." My Aunt Carol, a notorious busybody, called me, her voice dripping with thinly veiled judgment. "Sarah, your mother is very upset. Is everything all right? Family is everything, dear." I listened patiently, then calmly explained, "Aunt Carol, I love my family, but I also need to prioritize my own well-being. Sometimes that means setting boundaries." She didn't understand either. Kevin, desperate and increasingly angry, resorted to outright sabotage. He started posting cryptic, passive-aggressive messages on social media, hinting at my supposed heartlessness. "Some people forget where they came from when they get a little money," one read, clearly aimed at me. He even tried to contact my boss, fabricating a story about a family emergency to get me to call him back. My boss, a shrewd woman named Eleanor, saw right through it and simply forwarded me Kevin's email with a raised eyebrow emoji. I thanked her and blocked Kevin's email address. Lisa, ever the master of passive aggression, started leaving snide comments on my social media posts, usually about how I was too busy for family or how my new lifestyle had made me forget my roots. I quietly unfollowed them all. The guilt was a constant companion, a dull ache in my chest. Every unanswered call, every declined invitation, every firm no felt like a tiny betrayal, a tearing of the fabric I had spent my life weaving. I had been conditioned to believe that my worth was tied to my usefulness to them, to my ability to fix their problems. Stepping away felt like shedding a skin, leaving me raw and exposed. It was during these moments of agonizing self-doubt that Maria became my anchor. Maria, my oldest friend, who had witnessed the slow erosion of my spirit over the years. She listened without judgment, her dark eyes filled with understanding. We'd meet for coffee, or she'd come over to my apartment, and I would pour out the latest family drama, the guilt, the fear that I was a terrible person. "Sarah," she'd say, her voice calm and steady, "you are not responsible for their choices. You are not their ATM, their therapist, or their punching bag. You've given them years of your life, your energy, your money, more than enough. You deserve to live your own life, free from their chaos." She helped me reframe my actions. It wasn't revenge, it was self-preservation. It wasn't abandonment, it was liberation. She reminded me that their inability to cope with my boundaries was their problem, not mine. "They're reacting because their comfortable system has been disrupted," she explained one evening, sipping her tea. "They're not upset because you're a bad person. They're upset because they've lost their fixer. That's a huge difference." Her words were a balm, slowly healing the deep-seated wounds of guilt. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, older woman named Dr. Chen, who echoed Maria's sentiments. She helped me unpack decades of ingrained family patterns, the subtle manipulations, the emotional blackmail. She taught me to recognize the signs of their toxicity and to reinforce my boundaries, not with anger, but with quiet resolve. Months turned into a year. The calls from my family became less frequent, their accusations less potent. Kevin, surprisingly, found a new job and, out of sheer necessity, learned to manage his own finances, albeit poorly. Brenda still called occasionally, her voice still laced with a hint of martyrdom, but I no longer felt the familiar tug of guilt. Lisa still made her snide remarks, but they bounced off me, harmless. My father remained silent, a distant figure in the background. I hadn't cut them out of my life entirely. I still attended major family events like Christmas or significant birthdays, but I did so on my terms. I arrived with an exit strategy, limited my interactions, and refused to engage in their usual dramas. I was a visitor now, not a resident. The peace that settled over me was profound, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my daily life. My apartment, once a refuge I fled to, became a sanctuary. My finances were thriving. My relationships outside the family deepened. I started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or energy for. I rediscovered hobbies, read books, and simply enjoyed the quiet solitude I had craved for so long. My family remained dysfunctional. Kevin would likely always struggle with responsibility. Brenda would always seek validation and play the victim. Lisa would always be sarcastic and competitive. David would always be passive. Their patterns were too deeply ingrained, their narratives too firmly set, but their dysfunction was no longer mine to bear. The revenge wasn't about making them suffer, though a part of me, a small, bruised part, might have secretly wished for it in the beginning. It was about making myself free. It was about choosing my own peace over their perpetual chaos. It was about the quiet, powerful act of saying, no more. And in that no, I found my truest yes. Yes to myself, yes to peace, yes to a life, finally, truly, my own.